Hello and welcome to the first lesson in our Lord of the Flies GCSE Prep series. We're going to be covering lots of things together over the next roughly 10 weeks. So let's just do a quick overview of what we'll be looking at together. We'll be looking at characters, Ralph, Jack, Piggy, the Beast. Maybe we'll slip in some Simon as well because he's very important, and Roger. We'll be talking about some of the major themes in the play, or not the play, the novel. Civilization, violence, the supernatural are some of the major ones, as well as death, destruction, atrophy. So we'll be thinking about themes. Those are the most likely topics to come up in your GCSE exam. So I'll be giving you lots of key quotes, context, key sort of analysis that you can add in to make sure that you're boosting your grade as much as possible in those exams. For most exam boards, we also need to cover some context. So we'll be talking about William Golding. We'll be talking about post-war England of the sort of 1945 into the 1950s era when this is written. We'll be talking about William Golding as a person as well, who he was, what he thought, what he did, that sort of thing. We'll be doing lots of model paragraphs and answers to questions on each character and theme. Going to try and do one of those each lesson if I can towards the end, even if it's just a quick 5-minute thing. And I'll also give time to get feedback from my students. Feel free to drop comments in this video, questions answered, that sort of thing. A lot of that seems to be more students approaching me after the lessons. That's also totally fine. Okay, so today's lesson, we're going to be diving straight in with the protagonist, Ralph. This is the actor who played Ralph in the movie version. Ralph, I think, probably is described fairly similar to what this boy looks like because he is described as a fair-haired boy. So we'll start by thinking about what Ralph sort of represents, what kind of a character he is. So Ralph is a character who effectively is going through a really harsh journey throughout this novella. He starts off as a young boy. He's kind of 11 or 12 years old. He is very innocent, naive. He's basically what you'd imagine a sort of a normal 12-year-old to be like, really. He hasn't been corrupted by the world, so to speak. He doesn't really know how the world even works just yet fully. And yet here he is on a deserted island. And at the beginning of the novella, all we have is him wandering around on a sunny beach and Piggy chasing after him and sort of hassling and bothering him. And he feels this sense of freedom in this moment. He even shouts out, he's like, no grown-ups, like this is a dream to him to have no grown-ups. And even that shows his naivety because he obviously doesn't realize that without civilization, without order, he's going to have a real tough time on this island. And Ralph, being the main character, is sort of the lens with which we as the readers sort of discover this slow, decline and suffering of the boys. So it starts off really nice. He's doing, cartwheels and handstands on the beach. He strips down naked, which is a bit weird, but it's a sign of his freedom from everything. And he just dives into the water and he's swimming around. But by the end, one of the quotes I'll be talking to you about, one of the main quotes from Ralph, is he actually ends up, as he's about to get rescued, just breaking down, crying, realizing the darkness of man's heart, realizing that there's a lot of pain and suffering in this life and a lot of corruption. And he's effectively lost his childhood innocence by the end of the novella. Okay, or novel, sorry, not novella. What is it? Is it a play? Is it a novel? Is it a novella? It's a novel, okay? It's a novel. Talk about it as a novel or a text. It's not a novella. Novella is a short novel of less than 100 pages, normally is the cutoff. This is a novel. Sorry about that. Okay, so Ralph also is incredibly important because he's the chief. So he represents an attempt by the boys at authority within the novel. I went to say play again, sorry. He represents that authority figure. And the reason that they vote for him as chief is not really because of any competence within him. He's not a competent boy. He's not that smart either. He's not stupid, but he's not particularly overly intelligent. He's not probably as intelligent as Jack. He's certainly not as intelligent as Piggy. they basically put him up for the job of chief because he doesn't even discover the conch, Piggy does, but he gets the conch and he blows the conch and he brings together the boys at the beginning. And he's also one of the oldest, tallest boys. So they're like, yeah, he'll do. He does take the role of chief very seriously, though. So even though he's just a young boy and he's been put into this role that he can't possibly fulfill properly, of like, you know, the king of desert land, he does his best and he grows through that experience. Now, that's an important thing to think about as well in terms of characters and their arcs. I would say that Ralph is really on a growth arc overall, but it's a tragic growth arc. So he learns and grows through the experience of being on the island, but it's a tragic growth. He loses his childhood innocence and it's replaced with like a more adult cynicism. He's seen some terrible things on this island. Think about what has happened on this island in this book. You've got, you know, they burned down half the forest pretty much on their first day there, right? In their enthusiasm to build a fire. And it's not even a good fire because it doesn't create much smoke, which is why they wanted the fire to signal to the other, to boats and things that might be passing that they need rescue. So they burned down half the island. There's the boy with the mulberry colored birthmark on his face who clearly dies in the fire, even though they want to sort of deny that. So there's a death on day one, a death and maybe some cooked fruit, right? That's what they get from day one. Then, you know, they start to worry about the snake thing, and then it's turned into the beastie, and then it's the Lord of the Flies, who we'll talk about in another session. But this then again is this sense of just horrific superstition, paranoia, that sort of thing on the behalf of the boys. Then, as they get more scared of the beast and more scared of the unknown, they end up stabbing Simon to death on the beach, right? They stab him to death. And Ralph is one of the boys that stabs Ralph is one of the boys that stabs Simon to death. They're all kind of guilty of this. And then obviously he watches as Piggy is killed. The rock lands on Piggy's face, basically, and just shatters him and shatters the conch, kills them both. Well, the conch wasn't alive, but destroys the conch, kills Piggy. And then, if that's not already enough, he has his chiefdom, like his role, stolen from him by Jack, and is then hunted like a pig towards the end of the novel. You know, that's the ending really for Ralph on the island before being rescued, is they're hunting him down like an animal. He becomes more like a wild animal in that time as well. He's like lunging and darting away from things. And he obviously then through this process realizes the darkness of man's heart. So he represents civilization, but he represents it in a sense of a broken civilization. He represents childhood innocence. He represents corruption effectively, or receiving corruption, right? He represents leadership, but very weak leadership. He represents authority, but very weak authority. But most importantly, Ralph is really the lens with which we see everything happen. Okay, so now let's dive into some quotes for Ralph. These are quotes that I would recommend you remember and use in your essays on Ralph, if that comes up in your GCSEs. So first one, "We must go as we are," said Ralph, "and they won't be any better." Eric made a detaining gesture. So this quote here is subtext and symbolism. Now, I've done these in a random order deliberately. I thought it was too boring to just do the first quote in the beginning of the book first, and so on and so on. This is after Jack has stolen fire from Ralph and Piggy. Well, Piggy's glasses is the fire, right? And they're talking about going back now to Jack's tribe to get the glasses back. But Ralph doesn't want them to paint themselves like Jack and his tribe does. The paint, which we can talk about a little bit, is symbolic of sort of hiding and masking, right? For some of the boys, it represents costume and playing. So I think that Jack, for example, doesn't realize the gravity of what they're doing on the island that much. And he's always painted up and he always sees it as a costume almost. But I think that Ralph understands the significance of the paint. And he doesn't want to be a savage. He wants to go dressed in their clothing, dressed as civilized people, to actually stand up against Jack and his savages, who are all, half naked at this point, painted up, dancing, killing pigs, whatever. They'll be painted, you know how it is, short sentences with the exclamatory. This adds to the drama of this moment. This is all from the same bit, should I say, as well. This is like a little exchange. The others nodded. They understood only too well the liberation into savagery that concealing paint brought. So this bit again is that symbolism and subtext, this idea that Ralph is trying to keep the boys from being savages. And one of the ways he does that is trying to avoid letting them paint themselves up and look like savages, because that savagery is what leads to all of the murder and the superstition about the beast and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really good, it's almost like a set of quotes really, but a good moment for Ralph. Something deep in Ralph spoke for him. I'm chief, I'll go, don't argue. So we have the short sentences, and it's also a triadic structure. I'm chief, I'll go, don't argue, for emphasis. And this shows the power of Ralph. So even though Ralph isn't the best leader by any means, I mean, he's 12, like how is he going to be a good leader at 12? There's this instinct within him, this leadership role within him that's trying to come out. And he uses language quite well. He even, before an assembly, he's pacing around trying to think about how he can do a better job of being a leader and a chief for the boys. And he thinks about how he needs to repeat his words. And at this point, he also knows short sentences for emphasis is really good. And it also shows his strength and his bravery. So he is a brave character. He's a strong character. He doesn't want the boys to descend into savagery and kill each other. He wants to be strong for them. But unfortunately, he just isn't strong enough for them. Now, that links very quickly into something that William Golding would have sort of conveyed or were trying to convey. William Golding was a Christian. He fought in World War II. We'll talk more in detail about context in the future, but effectively, he believed that there is a darkness in man's heart, which again is a quote I'm going to link to from Ralph. So he believed that no person would be able to actually guide society away from savagery fully. There's no king, queen, prime minister, leader, whatever, that can actually stop savagery from happening. And as a Christian, he would believe that that darkness is within us. It's like a fallen issue. It's a problem that we are deeply bad as people. There are problems with us. And so no matter how hard we try to be good, we can't quite make it. Now, I haven't got a quote for this, but a quote that is really good to show that in Ralph as well is the fact that he goes out on a hunt with Jack and the others, and he throws a spear at the pig. And the pig actually does get wounded from him, and he's proud of it. He's like, I hit the pig. Did you see? So that savagery is in him too. That savagery to kill and to provide meat for the group is in Ralph, even though Ralph is trying to fight that savagery by not being painted and by trying to, as best he can, stay clean and dressed properly and hair tied back. And it really annoys him how dirty and long hair and long nails all the boys are getting. He sees that savagery growing in them. Okay, next one. Piggy and Ralph, under the threat of the sky, found themselves eager to take a place in this demented but partly secure society. They were glad to touch the brown backs of the fence that hemmed in the terror and made it governable. So in this bit here, we have this real conflict within Ralph and Piggy as the more kind of leaders and also representing kind of more the good side, even though there are problems to these characters too. The demented but partly secure society. The adjective demented obviously is basically a word for insane, an insane society, yeah? But it's then juxtaposition because even though it's demented, it's secure. And typically you don't think of things that are insane or demented as also being secure. That doesn't tend to go together. But here, the demented but partly secure society, it's the comfort which Jack's boys, the hunt, all of that stuff represents. that is being mentioned here. So that's another really important quote. It shows the weakness within Piggy and Ralph, really. The fact that Ralph, even though he's chief, he still goes to Jack and his group for security at night. He still eats the meat that Jack provides for the boys, which again symbolizes that on some level, even though he's chief, he's sort of giving in because he's also just a little boy trying to hold this all together. Okay, couple more, and then we'll go into a very fast model answer, or at least some ideas of a model answer on Ralph. Something deep in Ralph spoke for him. I'm chief. I'll go. Don't argue. Wait a minute, we've already done these ones. Oh, that's interesting. We've got a couple of slides that are the same. Okay, here we are. The thing is, fear can't hurt you any more than a dream. Now, this quote, I think, is quite ironic about Ralph, because even though he feels that he can't be hurt by his fear, he still ends up being overrun by his fear towards the end. I mean, he's literally petrified, running away from the boys. He goes to Jack's society, as I say, because it's at least slightly secure, even though it's a bad society that Jack is building that doesn't have fire to try and rescue them or anything, right? That's another thing to remember just quickly. There was a moment where if Ralph had managed to be a stronger leader and get the boys to keep the smoke going, a ship did go past, and there's a chance they would have been rescued at that point. So that again just shows that his leadership is a bit up and down. He tries his best, but he can't really make it happen. There aren't any grown-ups. We shall have to look after ourselves. Again, we see these short sentences, right? And this is a development in his character, because earlier on at the beginning, he's saying like, no grown-ups, and he's really excited about it. Whereas now, as he's going weeks and weeks on the island with no grown-ups, he's realizing how much he wishes that he could have grown-up attention, like just grown-ups to look after him. And he even dreams, sort of daydreams about being back home in England and the safety and all of that. So as it goes on longer, he realizes more and more how desperately he wants grown-ups. And there's also one other kind of irony or tragedy to that, which is the fact that Piggy represents the grown-ups. Piggy represents the grown-ups. And yet Ralph rejects Piggy all the way till the end, basically. He knows that Piggy is smart, and one of the other quotes for Ralph is, Piggy can think, yeah, or Piggy could think. So he understands that Piggy is special, but he still ignores Piggy. He still doesn't really listen to Piggy. So even though he's desperate for grown-ups and someone to lead him, he can't be led by Piggy. He's too maybe proud for that, or he just can't see that Piggy is actually the best leader, the best hope that the boys have. Now actually, I'm going to do this quote first and I'll end with this one. They looked at each other, baffled in love and hate. Now, this is Jack and Ralph, and it's that what's called a dichotomy, or a split between the two, between two leaders. Because on the one hand, you've got Ralph, who wants democracy and he wants to do the right thing as best he can. But on the other hand, you've got Jack, who doesn't want to do the right thing and just wants to be a dictator and force the boys to do everything that he wants. And they're in love and hatred, because at the beginning, Ralph and Jack get on really well and they have fun. But as time goes on, Jack becomes more and more pushing to become leader, less and less supportive of Ralph as leader. And obviously, eventually, Jack even tries to kill Ralph. And he tries to do it in a really horrible way. He sharpens a stick at both ends, which is exactly what he did to Piggy. To the pig, sorry, not to Piggy. When he kills the first pig, he cuts the pig's head off and sticks on the top of a stick, which has been sharpened at both ends. So he stabs it into the ground, stabs the pig's head onto it, and leaves it as an offering. So we get this horrible image that Jack, if he could have, Jack would have killed Ralph, decapitated him, stuck his head on a stick. How messed up is that? Okay, so then last quote. Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of a true wise friend called Piggy. Now, this is a super important quote. It's in the final chapter. This is after the army is now on the island, and so there's this adult standing in front of the boys, and Ralph just feels this overwhelming emotion. Now he knows he's finally safe, and he starts crying, and this is, as I say, the end of his tragic growth arc. He realizes he's lost his childhood innocence. He sees now that there is a darkness in people, in their hearts. And he realizes as well this regret that Piggy was his wisest best friend all along, but he didn't listen to Piggy the whole time. He didn't listen to Piggy. And if he had, my goodness, wouldn't things have been a bit better from doing that? So this quote here, it has, again, symbolism, it has metaphor, and it is showing, as I say, that total development in his tragic growth arc for Ralph. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes left. As I try to do at the end of each small session, I'll try and put a model answer in. So with all of these character questions, I'll typically just do a paragraph on how the character is presented. So I'll do the same with Ralph here. So Ralph is presented as a flawed leader throughout the novel. Okay, that's one way that Ralph is presented that I think is really important. We see this. Which quote am I going to use from the quotes that we have here? Yes, okay, we see this when he, we see this when he goes to, quote, the demented but partly secure society which Jack has founded on Castle Rock. It's always good to show that you know the setting and things like that. So the fact that Jack creates a separate tribe, they are at Castle Rock, that's always good to show off to the examiner that you know when and where and how and so on. The use of the adjective demented suggests the craziness and insanity of the tribe that Jack has created. But this is then juxtaposed by the secure society that Ralph feels when he is there. This shows him as a flawed leader because, that word because or something synonymous with because is really good. It shows Ralph is willing to compromise civilization for the comfort that being around other boys brings. As the reader, we want to do some reader response, of course, and context. So we've done point, evidences, some explanations, some techniques. As the reader, we feel pathos, that means pity, for Ralph, though. He is only 12 years old and having to try to run and maintain a group of young men. Then we'd finish with context. So significantly, Golding fought in World War II and would have seen many flawed leaders having to make compromises in that scenario, often leading to pain, death, and destruction. So we've added a little bit of context at the end. So there's a model paragraph for Ralph. I managed to do that in just about 4 or 5 minutes, but it has a couple of good quotes that you can use, some good explanation. And this is a model paragraph that you could put into a GCSE essay if Ralph came up, assuming it's about presentation of Ralph, obviously, and do really, really well. Hope that was helpful. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the Discord or in the comment section below.